An Instagram icon's body found on the side of the road, and a funeral home's egregious side hustle. These are just two of 2020's many tragedies. Be sure to like and subscribe, but aside from that, welcome back, cadavers. This is The Hard Truth. If you happen to be an Instagram scroller, you may have passed by or even followed a young lady by the name of Alexis Sharkey. Born Alexis Robinant, Alexis had recently wed a Tom Sharkey, and although her last name wasn't legally changed, Sharkey would be the surname that she used on social media, especially on Instagram, where Alexis's following was growing rapidly. Aside from Instagram, Alexis worked as a contractor for Monat, a hair and skincare company branding itself mostly to women, priding itself on its vegan and all-natural ingredients. And although the company has gotten some backlash recently due to some of its products causing your scalps to blister and hair loss, Alexis fully endorsed the company, and as well as its products' benefits. You know, regardless of a few hair-pulling blemishes. Alexis's Instagram posts are sprinkled with tutorials and how-to videos on the product. And I must say, in contrast to all those negative reviews, her hair looks baller. But unfortunately, here at The Hard Truth, our episodes aren't centered around product quality. It was a Saturday morning on November 28th, the weekend following Thanksgiving, when Alexis Robinant's body would be discovered by a Houston City solid waste and sanitation worker. The city worker would make the discovery after noticing a pair of feet sticking out of some brush on the side of the road. At first, the city employee just assumed it was a mannequin dumped in the grass, but it would turn out to be Alexis's clothless body. 911 was called to the location of Red Hall Street, which is a small remote road just a stone's throw from the I-10 highway. If you search your maps of the area, you'll notice in the cover of night one could easily go unseen due to the narrow streets surrounded by trees and tall grass. The sanitation worker who made the saddening discovery would say two interesting details about Alexis's body. Firstly, he noticed that Alexis's body had no visible markings or bruising of any kind. Secondly, he would say that it looked like her body was placed. Moreover, as if someone carried her body to the location and gently laid it down, instead of throwing it out of a vehicle. John Richardson is actually the supervisor of the worker who found Alexis. But John would be the one to make the call because the worker wasn't sure if what he was looking at was real. And Richardson would go on to say that Alexis, aside from not having any visible wounds, was clean. His exact words were, "It looked as if she had just gotten out of the tub." On November 30th, her husband Tom Sharkey would be called down to identify her body, and from there her family and friends would learn about her tragic death. As of today, no one has been arrested nor any suspects named. Although there is an investigation, at this moment officials have yet to call this a murder. I should also add that Houston PD isn't suggesting that foul play is not involved. They are just being close-lipped about the details, since this is a high-profile case with a lot of attention. So much attention that Alexis Sharkey's Instagram page has tripled in followers since her death. Now, before we get into the timeline of events, I want you to really consider everything that I tell you, so you can form your own opinion as to what happened. Once that is all said and done, I'd love to hear from you in the comments and know what you think happened to Alexis Sharkey. On November 26, Alexis would spend Thanksgiving with her friends in Houston. After they would part ways, and Alexis would return home to her apartment that she shared with her husband, Tom. Tom would say that the last time he had seen his wife was on November 27th, revealing that Alexis did make it home after her Friendsgiving get-together. But Tom would also say that Alexis was heavily intoxicated. She would then leave their apartment, and many hours would go by with no word from Alexis. But later on that evening, Tom would reach out to his mother-in-law, Stacy Robinant, to inform her that he has not heard from her daughter in several hours, and he was beginning to get worried. The next day, Stacy Robinant would make a public post about her daughter's disappearance. But by the time she had made the post public, unbeknownst to her, her daughter had already been discovered. So let's talk about some theories, and then we'll move on to suspects. Friends and family, including mother Stacy Robinant, believe that without a doubt, Alexis was murdered. There are those that speculate that the lack of bruising is due to an overdose, but Alexis had no history of drug abuse. And there are ways that an individual could kill another and leave no marks, such as suffocation. And if you recall, the sanitation worker who had found Alexis's body said that it was unusually clean, as if she had just gotten out of the tub. So another possibility is drowning. Even though Alexis's autopsy has been completed, no official report has been made public. But we do get a hint. In my opinion, it's a pretty incriminating one, but hey, we'll get into that in just a moment. But first, let's discuss the elephant in the room, and that elephant being this very intimidating former bodybuilder of a husband Alexis was married to. Alexis and Tom had gotten married in Vegas in December 2019. And when it comes to suspects, the spouse or the person who had last seen the victim is usually the one most looked at. Although Tom is 23 years her elder and maybe scary looking to some, he is all over Alexis's Instagram. And from an outsider looking in, they looked happy. And when the police would interview Alexis's mom and ask about their marriage, she would defend Tom. At first. Tom has since cut all communication with the family of his deceased wife. Things also don't look good for Tom since going back on the promise of releasing Alexis's body to the family for funeral purposes. Tom had been listed as Alexis's next of kin since they were married, and pre-autopsy he had agreed to release Alexis's body to the family so they could hold a viewing and properly say their goodbyes. But then something changed. Instead of working with the family, he decided to withhold her body for some reason. Some of Alexis's friends were interviewed, both anonymously and not. But there was a common theme. When asked about Alexis and Tom's marriage, they all said it was not a healthy one. I mean, maybe at first they did, but one friend by the name of Kendra Martin had recently pulled Alexis aside asking her what was wrong after noticing a change in her demeanor. Alexis would acknowledge the observation by breaking down into tears and confessing that Tom had become abusive. Kendra would admit that the newlyweds were already planning for a divorce, though at the time of Alexis's death, they were a mere weeks away from their year anniversary. Now, Alexis's mother was unable to back up the separation claim, but due to COVID, it had been a year since she had last seen her daughter since living in Pennsylvania. Tom would deny any claims of abuse, divorce, or talks of separation, but friends would say it wasn't until August that Alexis would come to them revealing what was going on. So, a few things to think about here. For starters, Alexis did not choose to spend Thanksgiving with her husband, Tom, instead choosing to spend Thanksgiving with friends. And those friends would add that they put out the invitation to Alexis when she reported to them she'd rather spend Thanksgiving anywhere than at the apartment with Tom. And that alone does suggest distancing between the two. Secondly, if Tom had been abusing Alexis and truly had nothing to do with her death, then he probably would lie about the abuse to avoid from being wrongfully accused. However, the circumstantial evidence is not doing Tom any favors. And Tom is not helping his situation. Since cutting ties with the family, he has also cut communication with friends, media, and law enforcement. I did come across one report that stated that Alexis had sent a message to her friend. It was the last message she supposedly sent, and it was via Instagram on the 27th. The same day, Tom said she got up, walked out of the apartment, and never came home. And when that friend had asked Alexis what she was doing, she simply responded, "At home, watching movies." Unofficially, Tom is being suspected by those following the case. His guilt is definitely being hinted at by those in the media, and with his history of abuse, it sure does suggest he may have had something to do with her murder. But it is not my job to speculate. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty, and if you watch my channel, you'd know crazier things have happened. Regardless, the death of Alexis is a tragic one. Her friends to the company she worked for described her as warm, loving, and just as beautiful on the inside as she was the out. Do you remember earlier I said I would provide you with information that, at least to me, incriminated someone? Well, it's also somewhat of a win, at least to the Robinot family. Although the medical examiner has yet to reveal Alexis's cause of death, they did remove and deny Tom from his next of kin right to Alexis's body, officially changing it, allowing the Robinots to receive their daughter and hold a private viewing on December 18th, consisting of friends and family. And Tom was not invited. To me, the medical examiner's change to Tom's right to Alexis's body does suggest something, but ultimately we just do not know what their findings are. Before we move on to the next case, I would just like to say that if you are someone experiencing abuse, there are resources out there for you. One is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Their number is on screen now and will be in the description below. And I'm going to close up this case with a post made to Instagram by Alexis Sharkey, where it seems her and her friend are somewhere in downtown Houston raising awareness for child trafficking. And not to take away from that horrible truth, because just like domestic abuse, child trafficking is a terrifyingly real issue around the world. But if you were to single out Alexis in the picture and were not told that this sign was made in reference to child trafficking, you'd, like myself, recognize the eerie and coincidental implications that foreshadow her own abuse. Back in 2009, in Montrose, Colorado, a mother and daughter team successfully opened up a funeral home by the name of Sunset Mesa Funeral Home. 66-year-old Shirley Coach was the mother of Megan Hess, a 43-year-old mortician who took on the responsibility of assisting the recently deceased. She did this by respectfully prepping and handling their bodies, as well as closely working with the grieving families, helping to alleviate the stress of arrangements and offering services that would be too difficult for a loved one to perform. And that's exactly what the mother and daughter team did. I'm sorry, what? Maury Povich? Maury, the TV personality? He'd like to say something. Well, sure, bring him in.
The lie detector determined that's a lie.
So what really went down at this Montrosian-based funeral home? Before I tell you, I want to give you a chance to figure it out. It's common knowledge that morticians like Megan Hess embalm the dead so that way the bodies are better preserved for viewing and prolonged decomposition. And I actually interviewed a mortician and inquired about the process. Many of the vital organs are removed during the process. Some are discarded, but for many, at the end of the embalming process, organs including the brain are sealed in the stomach. The head is then stuffed with something like cotton to fill the cavity in place of the brain. This is done to prevent leaking as the brain decays. Another reason the brain as well as other vital organs are placed in the stomach is for a place to put it. In the old days, they actually discarded the brain because it obviously couldn't remain in the skull. So now, in the stomach it goes. Now if you're still clueless as to what Megan Hess and mother Shirley Coach did, that's okay, because I didn't say it yet. Here's a hint. The same year Megan Hess and her mother opened up the funeral home, they opened up a non-profit donor business out of the funeral home. Coincidence? And for those of you who still need a little help, that's okay, because I'm about to spell it out for you. The donor business the mother and daughter team ran was of course of organs and other body parts. Are you smelling what I'm stepping in? From 2009 to 2018, the Sunset Mesa Funeral Home harvested human remains without the grieving family's knowledge or permission. They turn around and sell them to a myriad of buyers who'd use them for medical, educational, or scientific purposes. They've sold everything from limbs, spines, and entire bodies without authorization. Meanwhile, the grieving families, who, let's not forget, are also paying customers, were confused when they would pay the funeral home over $1,000 for the cremation of a loved one, only to later receive an urn half full. It gets worse. In many cases, the ashes the grieving families received may not even been that of their loved one. So to the families that did receive a full urn of ashes, more than likely, it wasn't even their deceased loved one in the pot. Like an omelet of who knows who. It's f***ed up. The mother and daughter would eventually be raided and arrested by the FBI when grieving families who paid for services never received ashes at all, even though they paid in full. Not that that matters, but for example, here's a photo of Marine Gerald Cactus Hollenbach's bomber jacket. This is all his widowed wife Shirley Hollenbach has left of her late husband, since never receiving his ashes from the Sunset Mesa Funeral Home. Megan Hess and Shirley Coach took advantage of many vulnerable people, betraying the trust of those grieving and for many facing the most difficult points in their life. This scheme of theirs spans from 2010 to 2018 and was so lucrative that the funeral home was able to drop their cremation prices so low that no other funeral home in the area could match them. By undercutting all the honest funeral homes in the area, the Sunset Mesa Funeral Home was able to attract more paying customers, therefore obtaining more bodies to part out and ultimately gain more money. But in 2018, the sun did set one sunset, effectively ending the funeral home's disgusting pattern. But for those investigating the mother and daughter, the hole would only go deeper and darker. At the tip of the iceberg, the two had shipped out many body parts containing various infectious diseases such as hepatitis or HIV. They've even shipped out entire bodies, 38 at least, and several heads.
What's in the fucking box?
Now, if you're saying to yourself, this is old news, this happened in 2018, why are you covering this? I thought you only covered recent events. You're absolutely right. Though this story is a couple years off, the indictment isn't. That bad boy came out in 2020, and I had the displeasure of taking a look at it. And it's there that I discovered the number of bodies that these two disgusting individuals harvested and profited off of is in the hundreds. One can only guess exactly how many families fell victim to Sunset's sickening greed. I told you it gets darker. The mother and daughter team face up to 5 years in prison per count, as well as $250,000 in fines per count. And I have a feeling the courts aren't going to go easy on Megan and her mother. Currently, they have been charged with 6 counts of mail fraud each, and 3 counts of illegal transportation of hazardous materials each. We will soon learn the fate of Megan Hess and Shirley Coach as they are set to face their federal jury on April 12, 2021. We are out of time for today, but for those of you who would like to continue following the case of Alexis Sharkey, Houston PD has announced all future updates will be made via Twitter. To recap, I'd say keep a close eye on those you love in life and in death. But that is enough hard truth for one day. Sadly, there will be more tomorrow. Be good to another and stay safe. Until next time.